Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Friday's Ask a Scientist. My name is Kira Silverman. I am a scientist and Florida Operations Manager with Science from Scientists, and I'm here with our student today, Henry. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself and say where you're from?
Hello, my name is Henry Costa, and I'm over in Massachusetts. I'm in fourth grade.
Cool. So today, I think Henry's going to ask me some questions about animals, elephants, primates. So whenever you're ready, I'm ready to answer your questions.
So, the first question I came up with is how many different species of elephants are there?
Good question. So there's been a lot of debate among scientists for a while about how many species of elephants there are, but there are two main species. There are African elephants and Asian elephants. So within those two species, there are a couple of subspecies. So African elephants are divided up into African savanna or bush elephants, which are usually the bigger ones that roam around the plains. And then there are African forest elephants, which live mostly in forests, in the trees. And then Asian elephants are split up into Sri Lankan elephants, Indian elephants. There's also debate amongst scientists about whether or not there's another species. It's called the Pygmy Borneo elephant. It's the smallest of all elephants on the planet, but
Ooh.
I don't really know if it's a separate species or if it's just kind of a smaller version of the Asian elephant. So there's still kind of some debate about whether or not that's a whole separate species.
Wow.
Yeah, there's one other Asian elephant called the Sumatran elephant.
You kind of just answered my other sub question about that question. I was going to ask what are the differences, but you explained that.
But there's more. I can tell you more. So
Oh.
the main difference between African elephants and Asian elephants is where they live. African elephants are on the African continent. Asian elephants are on the Asian continent. Wow, crazy. The other main difference is that African elephants usually have much bigger ears, and their ears are kind of in the shape of the African continent. Like if you look at the map, it's kind of like a big triangle with a little pointy end. So the African elephant's ears kind of look like that shape, whereas Asian elephants have smaller, rounder ears. And the reason African elephants have bigger ears is because they live in a hotter climate, so they use their ears kind of like fans to help dissipate some of their body heat. And so they're bigger and they can move more air and cool them down faster. Um,
Mhm.
Another main difference is that African elephants tend to have like a round head, and Asian elephants kind of have like a domed head. So they have like one, two, and there's like a line, like a divot down the middle. And then the third main difference is that African elephants almost always have tusks, whether they're male or female. And then Asian elephants sometimes do or do not have tusks. And when they do, it's usually only in the males. And Asian elephants are generally a little bit smaller, but those are the three main differences.
I added this question, and I know that there are a lot of endangered animals right now because we're all destroying habitats and, poaching, and you know,
Yeah.
which is sad. But I'm wondering, what is the most endangered animal, if you know that?
First, we should probably define what exactly an endangered species is, which you kind of did. Brilliant. So, an endangered species is basically a species that's very likely to become extinct due to some of the risk factors that you said, like habitat loss, poaching, invasive species, climate change. So, yeah, there's a group, an international group called the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or the IUCN, and they keep a really extensive database called the Red List that classifies all the animals in the world and how endangered they are. So critically endangered, endangered, threatened, vulnerable, and even the ones that have already gone extinct. So there's a lot of animals in the world that are critically endangered right now. There's not really one that's the most endangered, but there's like a list of like the top 10. So I can tell you a couple. Blue whale, that's probably the most common one. When people think about an endangered species, they think blue whale. Almost every species of elephant is critically endangered. Sumatran orangutans, chimpanzees, eastern and western lowland gorillas, black rhinos, Javan rhinos, which are in Indonesia. And then another species that's been talked about a lot lately as an endangered species is the Amur leopard. And that one has a unique color pattern and it lives like in remote places and it's kind of isolated. So when people find them, they want to hunt them and take their fur. So that's a pretty good list of some critically endangered animals. I know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed that, and I thought there would be more water living animals than land living animals because, I mean, if you think about it, we're dumping plastic and trash and whatnot into the ocean.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of aquatic species that are also critically endangered. A lot of species of sea turtle, hawksbill turtles, green sea turtles, vaquita. It's a type of porpoise, kind of looks like a dolphin, but it's more like a small whale. Those are very critically endangered. There's a lot of different species in the ocean that are super, super affected by all of that pollution in the water. So yeah, really good point.
And I noticed that a lot of the causes for endangered animals are human created because one, we're like taking down habitats, we're poaching animals, heck, we're the creatures that are like spreading these invasive plants or animals. So
That's right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's so many factors, and a lot of it is just kind of our fault because there's so many people. And unfortunately, a lot of people in their day-to-day lives don't really think about how their actions and their behaviors affect the climate and the environment. And we built up cities, and we moved out and started encroaching into other animals' territory. And then we also have a lot of plastic products now that don't exactly break down very quickly in the environment. So yeah, a lot of that has to do with our human impact on the planet. Yeah, it's a
Mhm.
good observation.
And then why do some primates throw their feces?
I had a feeling that was going to be on your list. Good question. Um, so, throwing feces is not really like a normal behavior that we observe in primates in the wild. It's actually pretty rare. Um, that is something that we see a lot more in primates that are in captivity, ones that are like in zoos or in nature conservation centers and stuff. And particularly with chimpanzees, there's the most research and the most study of chimps throwing their poop. So um, chimps are actually prone to throwing things in their natural environment. They'll throw sticks or they'll pick up rocks and they throw them, and it's a way to display boredom. It's a way to um, display that they're annoyed about something, or it can be like a territorial thing where if there's another chimp that's encroaching on their territory, they'll throw stuff at them, and they have pretty good aim. So if we take a chimp and we put it into captivity, and think about a chimp that's in the zoo, if there aren't that many chimps in the exhibit and they see lots of human faces staring in at them through the glass, sometimes it might get them a little annoyed, or they might get angry, or they might feel a little scared or tense. And so chimps will often resort to throwing whatever's around them. And a lot of the times in their enclosures, they don't have rocks or sticks or things around. So they'll grab whatever they can find the most of and what's right there, which usually happens to be their feces. So that's
Yeah.
how they'll do it. Sometimes it's because they're bored, sometimes it's because they're frustrated, but it usually happens more in captivity.
Hmm. Do all primates have the same behaviors? Because I'm talking about maybe like the wild ones, not because we humans are primates, and obviously we don't see chimps building skyscrapers. So.
Right, yeah. So there's a lot of primate behaviors that kind of cross over between most species, and they're somewhat different depending on the species and where they live, but there are some behaviors that we see in all primates in the wild. So one behavior that we see a lot is grooming. So we'll see a lot of social grooming where like moms will pick bugs off of their babies, or sometimes if there's like a hierarchical group, like a social structure where you have like a dominant male or a dominant female at the top of the food chain or at the top of the group, and then you have some lower level monkeys at the bottom end of the group. Sometimes those monkeys will groom their superiors. So like the alpha will recruit all of the lower monkeys to groom them and make them look nice and pretty. Um, it's also an important mechanism in strengthening the relationships between monkeys and their social group, or primates or apes or any other species within the primate family. There's another behavior amongst primates that's a lot, it's very similar to what humans do, and that's how they are able to communicate with each other. They can communicate through body language, through vocalizations, through gestures. They can communicate by smelling each other and picking up scents and territories. And there are even some primates that are able to use sign language or symbols to communicate, which we've seen with like chimps and gorillas sometimes, ones that are more in captivity and being studied by humans. We've been able to teach them sign language and find a way to communicate with them. Another unique primate behavior is that most primates, not all, have some kind of a social structure. So there's like a troop or a group of primates that live together in the same area. And I kind of mentioned this before, But within those primate groups, there's a dominance hierarchy. So there's usually like an alpha male and an alpha female that have risen to the top of the group either because of their age, because of their intelligence, or because of their ability to gather resources and knowledge of the area. These hierarchy structures are not solid. Primates can move up or down within that order. But ones that are at the top have more access to resources, have more access to better mates, and usually reproduce more. And so that dominance hierarchy we see in a lot of groups of different primates, which is really cool.
Hmm. And you can find that in a lot of like human groups too. There's usually like, I mean, like a lot of jobs. You have like a boss, and then you have like lower people, and then you keep getting lower, and people can move up and down.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. That's exactly right. And elephants have social structures too. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
they're elephants usually form social groups that are consist mostly of females and babies, and male elephants tend to be loners, so they like wander by themselves, and once they hit a certain age of maturity they break away from the group and they live solitary and like a solitary existence. But elephants also have social structures where there's like a lead matriarch or the lead female in the group who is much, much older and also has passed down knowledge from other generations of elephants about where the watering holes are, where the best places are to find food and minerals and resources, the best places to hide if there are predators, and migration routes that elephants take when the seasons change. And so those groups of elephants will stay together and learn from the matriarch, and then eventually the next oldest matriarch, when that one dies, will take over and lead the group, and they'll come together to protect their young and to defend themselves in a big group, which is really cool. Another reason why I love elephants so much.
Hmm. I never knew elephants migrated. That's cool.
Oh yeah, elephants.
Yeah.
Yeah, elephants have to migrate. They do one of the biggest migrations too. They move um, constantly searching for water because they're huge, huge animals. So they need lots of water, lots of nutrients, and they're also very slow moving. And it takes a lot of time for them to invest in having a baby. So elephants are pregnant for 22 months. That's like almost 2 years. It's a long time to be carrying a baby. And so they put a lot of effort and energy into having a child. And so when they have a baby elephant, it's like, a really big deal because we've brought another offspring into the world. And so the whole group will come together to protect them. And then when the seasons change, they have to keep moving to find water and to find sources of food, especially on the African continent where the environment can get really harsh in the summers.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I noticed the Dumbo poster behind you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it gave me an idea for a question. Are there any behaviors that elephants have only when they are in captivity?
Yeah, there are some that I can think of off the top of my head. A lot of the times, I don't know if you've ever seen like on YouTube or online. Have you ever seen like videos of elephants painting? An elephant that's been in captivity can be trained to paint something or like pick up a paintbrush with their trunk and actually use different colors and make a painting, which in the wild they might not do exactly like that. I don't think they're gonna find some paint, set up an easel, and get a canvas out in the middle of the desert. It would be pretty cool if they did, but they might, in the wild, maybe they'll make markings with their tusks, or if they get bored they might do something similar. But that specific behavior is one that we see in captivity. Otherwise I'm not really sure.
Yeah, that's cool. I had a question, and I know the answer is probably a little more obvious than I think, but what counts as an animal? Like, what's the line between animal and everything else?
Yeah, good question. So animals are classified as an organism that is multicellular and eukaryotic. So multicellular organisms consist of more than one cell. So animals, plants, fungi, anything that has more than one cell in their body. Now, eukaryotes are organisms whose cells have a nucleus and organelles that are bound within membranes. So they're not free moving within the cell. They have restrictions and boundaries. Um, Another classification that helps us identify animals separately from plants and any other species is that animals consume organic material, so they eat other species. They breathe oxygen. They're able to move. and they can reproduce sexually. So they need a mate and they have internal reproduction, similar to the way that humans reproduce.
Mhm.
Those are some ways that we can tell what's an animal.
What's your favorite primate behavior?
Oh, okay. So a couple of years ago, actually, not a couple, more than that. The summer after my freshman year of college, I volunteered at a wildlife sanctuary in Africa. And I was there for 6 weeks and I got to work a lot with baboons. And they are hilarious creatures. So, two of my favorite primate behaviors I observed firsthand, and that is they tend to be very, very sneaky. Primates can be sneaky, just like toddlers and humans. Sometimes there was a couple of baboons at the sanctuary that were really, really young. They were like tiny, tiny babies, and so there were four of them. And every night, these tiny babies would have to get paired up with one of the volunteers, and we'd zip them up in our jackets. We'd give them a little binky, put a little diaper on them, and we'd keep them for the whole night. Because I was there over the summer, but in Africa, that's their winter. So it was too cold for them to stay in their enclosure overnight. And one of these tiny babies was a little instigator. Her name was Sheila. And she would do this thing where she would go up to some of the volunteers and she would pull their hair and then run up to someone else and hug them and go, and like pretend it wasn't her, even though everybody saw. She would do that a lot. She'd run up to somebody, pull their hair, or like snap their clothes or pinch them, and then run over to somebody and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened. Hold me. Look how cute I am. So she's really sneaky. Very, very sneaky behavior. I feel like that's something that little kids do to each other too. You know? That was entertaining and funny. And then another thing that these baboons do, and a lot of other primates do, is they tend to have altruistic behaviors where they help each other. And so something else that I saw when I was there is we took this group of tiny babies out on a walk and we would take them to this one tree that they really like to hang out on. They'd climb up the tree and they'd jump off into our arms. It was a really fun, like hour-long playtime for them. And there was one time where we were sitting by this tree and one of the baby baboons was just digging something on the ground. He was playing. And then another baboon came up to him and started screaming and screeching and like jumping up and down. And it was because there was a rattlesnake hiding in like a little divot in the ground that was sneaking up on the other baboon. So he started yelling and warning and trying to tell him to get out of there and save himself. And that was pretty cool because I don't think anybody else in our group noticed that snake at first except for the other little baboon. So we helped him out. It's pretty cool. Yeah, those are two of my favorite things, that they're sneaky and they can be kind of mean, but they'll also help each other out.
Mm-hmm. How do you classify animals? Like, how do you say, well, this animal is like this, and this is this, and these are all grouped together as one? They're phyla, right? Like phylum. These are all.
That's one layer of classifying animals. Yeah, you already have a leg up. You know what you're talking about. So we group animals together in a hierarchy based on their shared physical characteristics. And when we put animals into an order like this, we call it taxonomy. And so we have a couple of different layers. You already said one of them is phylum. So the biggest layer is kingdom, phylum, class, order,
Or
family, genus.
genus, species.
Yeah. There's a fun little acronym that you can use to remember that. And the one that I learned when I was in school was King Philip came over for great soup. So the kingdom is the largest and broadest. And then as you move down towards species, which is the most specific, the levels become smaller and more specific. So like an example of a kingdom would be Animalia or Plantae or fungi. So like the biggest grouping. And then you continue moving down in that order. So like, for example, if we wanted to classify the African elephant, it would be kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, because they're vertebrates, so they have a spinal cord.
Mm-hmm.
Class Mammalia, same as us, exactly. Class Mammalia, same as us. And then it starts to get different around the order. So the order would be Proboscidae, which means that they have a long nose, a long appendage, something that they use as like a tool to help them get materials and resources. And then family would be Elephantidae. Genus would be Loxodonta. And then the species would be Africana. And so when scientists are classifying and they're naming species, they use the genus and the species name when they're naming an animal. So we would call African elephants our Loxodonta africana.
Uh-huh.
Seems really complicated, but it's a very systematic way of separating out all of the species based on their physical
Mhm.
characteristics and things that are similar between them. So that way we have a better idea of how many different species of plants and animals we have on the planet.
What are all the kinds of primates?
So, like elephants, we have a lot of debate and change over the years in how we classify primates because there's so many different species and they've been tied to evolution, and there's a lot of change and a lot of things that we still don't really understand about how primates have developed over the years. But we can classify primates into two different suborders. So there's suborder Strepsirini, which is lemurs and lorises, and they usually have like a wet, moist nose. And then we have the suborder Haplorhini, which is tarsiers, and then something you've probably heard before, New World monkeys, Old World monkeys, apes, and humans. So New World monkeys we find primarily in South America and in the rainforests. And they have a broad, wide nose with a
Mhm.
flat septum. And they also have prehensile tails, which is a unique feature. It allows them to cling to branches and move within the treetops so that they don't ever have to come down to the ground and be exposed to predators. So that's like a key trait for the New World monkeys.
Mhm. So like spider monkeys, they hang from their tails. So that would.
Exactly. Yep. Those are all New World monkeys. They also have most monkeys and most primates have opposable thumbs and like dexterity in their fingers. And typically, New World monkeys have a little bit less dexterity in their hands. So that's kind of why they have that tail as an extra appendage, just to give them more movement and able to grip on the trees. So now, Old World monkeys are primarily in Africa and Asia. They have narrower noses and they have downward facing nostrils, kind of like apes and humans do. They also have, instead of having tails, they usually have bare sitting pads. So, kind of like baboons have like big booties and mandrills have big blue booties. Those are Old World monkeys. And they do have a little bit more, they're more precise with their hands. So they use their hands and their feet a lot to grab things, to open up food, or like, if it's a fruit or something, break it open and move throughout forest floor. So those are like the main differences between those two.
And then speaking of prehensile appendages, the octopus I've heard can open a jar with its tentacles, and I actually heard a story that it flooded a whole aquarium because it was throwing pebbles at a tube that was like carrying water.
Octopuses are crazy smart, crazy smart. I saw a video one time of there's a lady who's a scuba diver, and she discovered an octopus in like one of her regular dive areas. And he was like really, really small, but really curious. And so, like, over a year and a half, she started developing a relationship with him. She'd keep going back to visit him, and she'd bring him things like a jar to open, or she'd bring like a mirror for him to look in, or she'd like put her arm down and he'd like try to grab her little hairband and stuff. So they're really curious and they're really smart. And having 8 legs certainly helps for throwing pebbles and escaping from enclosures. So
Back to the primates about like the new world and the old world and the apes and the.
uh,
So what makes these classified as different?
most of the way that we're able to differentiate all of these monkeys and primates is on their physical characteristics. So, like, we group them together more or less if they have similar characteristics, which is why we say most old world monkeys have prehensile tails and they are on the South American continent. And so that's just a way that we group them into one group, whatever. But there are some other characteristics that primates have that help us to further differentiate which species they are and how we group them. So there's a lot of other things that primates have. Most primates have forward-facing eyes that can move around in their orbital eye rings, and they also, something that's unique to them is they have stereoscopic vision. Do you know what that is?
Uh, it's like binocular vision, right? Like you can, like your eyes aren't seeing like a different vision. It's like they merge into one. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. So stereoscopic vision is the ability of the brain to take images from each eye and compose it into one image that our brain registers. It also allows them to see in 3D space, so they can perceive depth and they can see that something is far away or nearby, which is something that's not commonly found in a lot of animals. So that's one unique thing to primates. They're also able to, like we said, independently move their digits and their thumbs. They also have large and complex brains, which allows them to do a lot of these like cognitive processes, like, you know, be sneaky with each other or help each other out, or even develop language and communication. Some primates use tools, like they'll pick up, if they find a nut or a fruit that they can't open, they might pick up a rock and use it to open that. Or they sometimes will, use a stick or something as a tool or as a weapon,
Mhm.
which is super cool.
Mhm.
Um, Primates also usually have nails on at least one of their digits, whether that's their fingers or their toes, they have a nail. And then they also have like a clavicle or a collarbone as well. So, depending on how many of these different characteristics they have and how differently they've adapted or developed, that helps us classify primates into each of those different
Mhm.
suborders or families. All right. Well, it was really fun talking to you today, Henry. Thanks for all of your questions. Bye.